Welcome to Agri-Food Conversations, brought to you by iSelect, the Van Trump Report, the Yield Lab Institute, and Family Farms Group. I'm Eva Tucker from iSelect Fund, and I'm excited to welcome you all to our discussion today. Agri-Food Conversations is all about driving innovation in agriculture. Each month, we highlight a specific theme, including emerging topics such as soil health, plant genetics, vertical farming, and aquaculture, to name a few. This month's theme is soil carbon, and on today's call, we are joined by Dr. Anastasia Volkova, founder and CEO of Regrow. Regrow is the developer behind FluroSense, a cloud-based crop management and analytics platform that supports automated crop reporting across a farmer's entire business. Using the software, farm, and weather data, crop models and remote sensing imagery are combined to help users make informed decisions that positively impact their bottom line. The automated toolset can also measure, monitor, and verify sustainability practices with remote sensing data and integration with the farm management information system. Each of you knows companies are more likely to succeed with the right network of customers, talent, investors, and advisors. We have invited you to this call because you are some of the smartest, most talented people in Regrow's market. You are potential customers for Regrow's products and services. You have built a company similar to Regrow's, or you are a sophisticated business person or agricultural professional who understands the market and the challenges and opportunities Regrow may face. Before we get started, we have a quick poll question to get a better idea of who we have on the call today. Please take a few moments to answer. A few process comments while the poll is running. We are not soliciting investment. This presentation is to provide information to help Regrow find customers, mentors, and other strategic relationships that can help them grow their business. You are all on mute. You can use the chat window to ask a question at any time. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for replay. So without further delay, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Anastasia Volkova, founder and CEO of Regrow.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be speaking to you all as a CEO of Regrow. A number of you must have already seen an announcement earlier this week that FluroSat has completed the acquisition of another company, Dagan, and we have combined our forces and rebranded the joint entity into Regrow. We're rallying around the issue of resilient agriculture, and we believe we have the tools and what it takes to unlock its profit potential. I'm speaking to you all, of course, on behalf of my larger team, but also wanted to acknowledge that the leadership at Dagan has come on to Regrow, and Bill Salas, who many of you might already know. He's going to be Regrow's Chief Strategy Officer. In terms of how can you think of us and what is the impact that we have and who is behind this business, as I mentioned, effectively Regrow is a combination of Dagan and FluroSat. We're now 42 people with 9 PhDs on staff across 5 countries. We are backed by some of the best funds in the space, including Microsoft's Venture Fund, Australian Science Agency Fund, and a number of US-based investors. Our footprint has increased since you might have seen any presentation from either of the companies before, so I thought that it might be worth highlighting. It's more than 150 million acres that we've analyzed on a year-by-year basis. We have monitored 5 farms in 45 countries, and for especially the fields in the US, we collect more than just a couple of years of data, but as much as 15 years of data. So this gives us massive baseline around sustainability management practices, and that positions us really well in order to quantify the carbon outcomes. I also want to highlight that my team over the years has won a number of awards and been featured in a number of prestigious competitions. Probably one of the best ones to highlight is that our platform, FluroSense, has been named the AgTech Data Analytics Solution of the Year last year, 2020, by the AgTech Breakthrough Awards. Well, now when you have a bit of a background on the business, I would like to show you a little bit more of our process and how the different pieces have come together. So the process is really threefold. You can start by just understanding the fact that, okay, there's the agronomy part to the science, there's sustainability part, and there's the carbon part. Um, how does it work? And they all feed one into another. We will, of course, dive deeper into each one of them, but the basic premise behind the interconnectivity is that not only we're treating each of them as important component, but we're not treating them in isolation. We've really taken the data that powers agronomic decision making and see how that decision can be made with the sustainability goals and with the carbon sequestration goals in mind. So now, if we look at these three particular pillars of our business separately, let's dive into each one of them and understand a little bit more about what do they represent. So agronomy, this is the module that came from largely from the FluroSense platform that already was there, from FluroSat serving the front of the supply chain, ag input manufacturers, retailers, food processors. We run what's called an APSIM model. It's an agricultural production system simulator model. It's a very sophisticated crop model that allows to um, combine soil data, weather data, agricultural management data, and get a daily view of what the crop's nutrient requirements would be and what it would require in order to reach a certain either yield target or a certain rate of sequestration of carbon or root length, etc. The interesting part is that we've developed the agronomy module in such a way that it really supports decisions of advisors, of the farmers and their advisors on almost daily basis in season, and supports critical decisions outside of season when you look back and make decisions that are going to likely shift your strategy based on what you learned in the previous season. So the weekly reports and alerts include crop performance monitoring. And this is something that all of you would kind of be conceptually probably familiar with, the ability to know the growth stage of the crop. This is something we report on pretty much automatically without needing boots on the ground, and provide you with this information. We detect crop stress in particular areas where the crop stress is developing. Based off of the APSIM simulator is the nitrogen recommendation and the yield estimation as well. So you can see how in this part of our this pillar agronomy in this part of the system, we really take care of all the in-season nutrient cycles and balances, and we provide very direct recommendations of very straightforward like shape files and email reports and alerts that can be consumed in a very streamlined workflow, which allows to really scale digital agronomy services to more geographies, as well as to help them penetrate more agribusinesses. In terms of the sustainability module, here we're using Optis model, operational operating tillage information system. So this is something that we detect tillage and cover cropping using this model. This is really a fascinating concept if you haven't heard about this before, that indeed, without just walking the fields, without driving up the driveway and checking if there's residue on the field, you can use agronomic models and satellite imagery to understand what is the pattern of cropping on the field and detect the events and understand the attributions of those events. So for example, we detect 4 classes of tillage by understanding the residue on the field. We map the days of green cover, of senescent cover. And within this module, also we have kind of the interlace between legacy FluroSat functionality and legacy Dagon functionality, where we also map crop types. This means for the consumer packaged goods companies, for the trading companies, for even large and medium-sized seed companies, that you, without necessarily having to collect the data manually on every single farm and every single field, you can get a really good idea of what are the farm management practices, what are the crops grown either around your fields or in that area where you would like to be, for example, sourcing, and get an idea of how many of those acres are sustainably farmed. I will show you some of the examples of this later in the presentation to give you a visual on all of this. And probably some of the most exciting part of the system, and finally something that can really help farmers get credited for the for the resilient practices that they implement on the farm, is the carbon quantification module. Here, it's based off of DNDC, denitrification decomposition model, one of the major multinational recognized academic model implemented into our system that quantifies soil organic carbon and greenhouse gases. I will once again show you the example of that. And the beautiful part of this triad is that it sits on the same platform that is enabled, FluroSense is the name of it, that it's enabled with data collection, so automatically collection of historical, for example, data such as imagery, soil maps, and as well as current collection of the data. We have APIs with a number of farm management systems, which I'm going to touch on next, and reporting services that really make the adoption of any and every of these tools a lot easier on agribusinesses, because implementation and workflow, as we know, is key. What we're offering here, what we're discussing here today, is not just a pilot program. This is really built for scale, as I mentioned, with already 150 million acres annually processed for this, and we will reach more than 350 million acres per year later this year. But touching on our brilliant partner ecosystem, we partner with farm management systems, as well as providers of data on farm equipment and imagery, as well as weather station, weather data, to really provide a holistic view of what the situation with the crop and with the soil is. And we also often talk back to these systems where we are offering our insights within the farm management systems, really combating the problem of too many systems, too many dashboards. We've dedicated a lot of engineering resources over the 4 years of the lifetime of our company to solving this problem, and we believe our integrations are some of the best in class in the industry. Now, speaking about each of the products a little bit more, we're going to dive separately into agronomy, then sustainability and carbon to get, as I mentioned, a little bit of a visual on what they look like. And then I'm, of course, looking forward to the Q&A. So in the agronomy decision support suite, it, of course, starts with crop performance, understanding the growth stages, emergence, understanding how something is tracking. Then the variable rate in-season nitrogen recommendations that are customized to the history of that field and do take into account the rotation, the benefit of the previous crop that was maybe the cash crop, maybe the cover crop. And the outcomes of those, of course, is shapefiles that are compatible with machinery, as well as PDFs to share recommendations with between the advisors and the farmers. Crop stress alerts, timely alerts that highlight which areas in the field and which fields on the farm may be suffering from stress. It could be rootworm diseases, it could be pest attacks or disease attacks somewhere else, it can be nutrient deficiency, it can be waterlogging. We have dozens upon dozens of use cases of farmers and agronomists, their advisors, field scouts, taking these polygons and scouting them through the farm management systems that we partner with, and really coming back with great results saying that I have not seen this with my eyes because I walked the field. I really followed this scouting guidance and I found something that I didn't know was there, and we were able to prevent the yield damage. Closer to harvest time, really understanding when is the time, what is the optimal moisture level in what crop, and what is the optimal route for the machinery to take to harvest the fields, is something that can be significantly minimizing the cost of labor, passes, fuel, as well as compaction on the field. So understanding that just with a simple dashboard, by understanding what crops are senescing and how fast they're senescing, which ones are ready to harvest, can really optimize both your dryer use as well as the timing of the harvest. Um, Finally, the two last pieces that I'm going to dive into more is what came to FluroSense from Dagan, which is looking at the personalization of the conservation practices on the field by field basis, on the farm by farm basis, and then field level, but also large scale mapping of sustainability practices, which we're going to dive into next. So I mentioned that we are able to use satellite imagery over um, a large historical span, such as 15 years, to map the adoption of tillage, effectively no-till, and cover crops across a large area. You can actually access some of these products. They were supported by the Nature Conservancy and the Conservation Tillage Information Center. You can access the free version of these products on the ctic.org website. And the field level of these products is something that we provide locally. What you're seeing on the map is effectively from a dark red. This is where there's least tillage. Majority of the fields are tilled conventionally, and the blue, the deep blue areas is where majority of the areas have already adopted no-till, and hence there's much higher level of residue. And we're tracking this year upon year, and you could also select particular crop types you want to be looking at. Now, when we go from tillage to cover crops, the situation is quite similar. You're able to see which cover crop acres were there in, say, 2018 compared to 2019 and 2020. And we're here looking particularly at the upper Midwest area, but by the end of the year, we will have this 15 years of history across the entire United States, which is very exciting. These metrics enable us to baseline the carbon sequestration and understand what has happened on the field over the years and how would it be reflected in the soil organic carbon change and particularly in the nitrous oxide fluxes. So how do these, the carbons and the nitrogens in the soil, how do they cycle? And apart from just pretty maps, I'm going to show you a very specific example that I think makes it very clear how this is done. So let's take one of the fields. It's highlighted in the circle on the left in red, and let's zoom in into what we understood about that field. So you can see the colored map on the left just demonstrates which fields we can see have been conventionally tilled or tilled not tilled at all. By the way, this data gets verified with large-scale feed collection campaigns, so we know that the accuracy of it is about 88%. So we know how accurate we are, and we know where the uncertainties are in our estimates of tillage and cover crops. So you could trust this large-scale data or understand at least that its quality and uncertainty in very much detail. Taking the 15 years of history, we have seen that this farmer, dark green line on the chart here, they have been using effectively no-till practices since 2005. And you can see that sequestration rates of carbon steadily going up, apart from when in 2019, they actually tilled their fields and the conservation rate, the sequestration rate, pardon me, drops down a little bit and then picks up again as they go back to no-till practices. Interesting fact that with the DNDC model, with the carbon model, carbon and nitrogen model that we're using, we can understand, so to speak, how the soil microbes connect to this system and connect satellites to these soil microbes. So on one hand, on the left-hand side, we use satellite data to map the practices. Now we are inputting these practices into a DNDC model and are asking, what if the farmer has tilled all the time and has not used any cover crops? This is the red line. It's what we call counterfactual. And the light green line at the very end of the graph demonstrates that if the farmer has not adopted the cover crops in 2015, their rate of sequestration of carbon would have been lower than the rate that they actually are estimated to have. Once again, this model, these estimates are also, you can find numerous peer-reviewed publications where is demonstrated what the accuracy of this model is. There's ongoing campaigns to continuously improve the calibration and validation. And we are at the point now where we're supporting several carbon market developers because the science has reached a point where we can understand the uncertainty on quantifying soil organic carbon sequestration. And this means that we can start moving with that estimate towards reducing the uncertainty year upon year. So hopefully these counterfactual scenario planning makes sense to you. Now, what are we thinking of offering and what are we looking out to next? We're working with some of our closest customers now across the supply chain. And if any of you are interested, of course, reach out to me or to my team. We are working on the simple scenario-based tool that allows every farmer, by selecting their fields, understand what practices and what adoption of what practices would pay the most for their particular field and farm. And this is, of course, taken into account the history that we mapped for their particular field. Here, the opportunity is to say, if we adopted no-till and cover crop, for example, what would be the combined benefit? Or, for example, separately, because this is a slightly different type of investment if they need to change machinery or buy cover crop seeds. And of course, a newer area is understanding how you can either incorporate manure into your nutrient balance, or how could you maybe shift from some of the synthetic fertilizers to some of the natural-based fertilizers there. So this is a tool that we're hoping to offer later this year, potentially through our interface first, but later on through the interface of the partners who we are developing this with. And so quite an exciting time for us. I want to cover one more thing for those who might be wondering, how does all this technology relate to carbon markets? And here I borrowed a graphic from the Outcomes Fund, and they do a brilliant job explaining kind of how between the funds and the markets and the outcome customers, there is this piece in the middle, this triangle, that someone needs to have the data from the farmers, make sense of it, be able to verify that that data actually lines up with independent observations based on models and satellite observations, and then to provide this data to the verifier so they can, so to speak, stamp that this is a verified outcome, that indeed these practices took place, they may be meeting the additionality criteria for this area, and hence indeed these are the carbon credits that we would like to credit for this farmer. So this is what a Regrow really does, apart from, of course, advancing the adoption of resilient agronomic practices, is we're supporting the carbon market developers and programs in understanding with the decision support tools that we have and with the data we're collecting on the monitoring verification, how and where they should invest, where they should focus, and really streamlining the process from interest from the farmer, not really knowing where the baseline is, to giving them the baseline, giving them the options to choose in terms of adoption, and then seeing how they can be changing that carbon sequestration outcome. At that point, we pass that information to whoever farmer wants it to be given to. We are, of course, not operating our own carbon market. I would like to touch on what our customers are saying, just to also reiterate the need from the market for these tools. It's science-based, low-cost, low-touch systems that really scale, as well as come with proven credibility, as well as for the companies that are looking at sourcing and working with farmers in a little bit of a more low-touch way and do not maybe have the farm management data access. This is also unlocking their view of quantifying the current rate of adoption of sustainability practices and seeing where they should adopt, where they should invest next for that adoption to increase. I thank you all and open the floor for questions. Please reach out to my team at hello@regrow.ag, and really excited that we had a chance to connect today.
Thanks, Anastasia. And I would encourage our audience to submit questions using the Q&A box in the middle of your screen, or there's an option to raise your virtual hand and I can unmute you so you can ask your question out loud. We encourage you to submit those questions. But in the meantime, we like to ask all of our presenters at AgriFood, what can our audience here help you out with and how can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. To find us is fairly simple. Head to regrow.ag and we're all there. You connect with us on LinkedIn. In terms of what the audience can help with is really learning more about the fact that there are ways of quantifying these practices now, and there are tools that are based on data. And I think the more we as agriculture industry are aware of this, the closer we will come to adopting the practices that are good for their resilience economically as well as environmentally.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions coming in from the audience? Looks like you did a pretty good job explaining things. All right. It doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. Oh, we do. So Mary Shellman says, congrats, Anastasia, on the acquisition and great presentation. Can you share the business model? How will you make money?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Mary, for the question. Great to get this one. In terms of the business model, this is not very dissimilar from what we have done in the past with FluroSense. So it's a kind of a price per acre model where the more modules you are consuming, the higher your price per acre is, so to speak. And basically the opportunity here is that if you're only requiring data at a very large scale, at a kind of aggregate scale, it is cheaper to consume than if you're requiring data on the field level, because realistically, this is where most of the intervention can be done. So we're kind of differentiating volume, scale, and the number of modules we kind of stack on. But the business model is really tailored to the adoption at a large scale. And so the prices are extremely competitive for this solution.
Great, thank you. We have another question that came in from Pedro. How many countries were the model Optus was used for the scientists?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So at the moment, Optus is primarily being used in the US. We're extending that to Canada, and we're starting discussions around the right data collection and partnerships to bring that to Latin America, Australia, and Europe. Those are kind of next rollout stages. So it's a little bit US focused for now, or North American focused, you can say. So we can think of it as US plus Canada. And we'll be extending it beyond that later this year.
Thank you. Another question came in. How can this offering bring value to local co-ops?
Great question. I think the most important part of the value that this brings is really the trusted advisors that are working with the farmers. It's no doubt that they're being asked, and we actually did a survey of 800 crop advisor certified professionals asking this question, whether they are being asked about carbon markets and adoption of sustainability practices and how to get into this in a way that it's economically viable. So we're really looking at simplifying that decision support, that process, that decision with decision support tools. So instead of just kind of wrangling many different spreadsheets and trying to understand what is the history of this field and where we should adopt cover crops, you can have a look at the performance of the last year's cover crop, really understand where you have the opportunities to implement the new practices, such as like maybe the performance of the cash crop wasn't as great. So this is where you implement cover crop, and making these decisions financially transparent is what we really want the farmers and their advisors be able to access.
Abby Singh says, congrats, Anastasia. How often is the modeling data, especially on carbon amount and GHG emission, validated experimentally, and by what methods?
Great question. So you can actually have a look at the number of different kind of peer-reviewed publications. Partly this academic model is really being used even outside of Regrow, non-commercially. So there's a lot of validation that is happening outside of just what we do. We, on an annual basis in several geographies, are collecting such data that allows us for validation. We have ongoing projects that are often multi-year for this.
Great. And the last is more of a comment than a question. It says, congrats on Regrow. We are so excited to see you stronger year after year. And with
Thank
that,
you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
yes, thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on all your progress to date. And thanks to the audience for your active participation. We host these calls every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. We hope you will join us next week as we kick off the theme of crop diversity and seed genetics for the month of March. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.